En nombre de la Universidad de Monterrey y de su Centro de Empresas Familiares, damos a todos ustedes la más cordial bienvenida a la ceremonia de entrega del 12º Premio UDEM Adalberto Viesca Sada a la investigación en Empresa Familiar Latinoamericana. Esta ceremonia está encabezada por el presidente del Consejo de Empresas Familiares, Gabriel Zambrano Benítez, y por el rector de la Universidad de Monterrey, Mario Páez González. Tenemos también el agrado de contar con la presencia de Lucía Treviño Villarreal y de miembros de la familia Viesca Treviño. Agradecemos asimismo la presencia de Carlos García González, vicerrector de Educación Superior, de Carlos Basurto, vicerrector de Vinculación, Efectividad y Servicios Académicos, y de Carlos Atoche, decano de la Escuela de Negocios de la Universidad de Monterrey. Es un gusto contar con la presencia de los autores de los trabajos premiados en esta edición del Premio UDEM Adalberto Viesca Sada 2020 a la investigación en Empresa Familiar Latinoamericana. A todos los que nos acompañan el día de hoy a través de esta comunicación en línea, sean bienvenidos. A continuación, tendremos un mensaje del vicerrector de Educación Superior de la Universidad de Monterrey, Carlos García González, y los dejo con el video.
Muy buenas noches, estimados consejeros, familiares de Adalberto Viesca Sada, investigadores, empresarios, directivos y profesores de la Universidad de Monterrey. Esta noche nos encontramos reunidos con el objetivo particular de fortalecer e impulsar a las empresas familiares por medio de las investigaciones que reconocen año con año el Premio UDEM Adalberto Viesca Sada, que hoy además celebra su 12ª edición. En un entorno de negocios tan retador como el que se vive actualmente, en donde la incertidumbre y la complejidad tienen efectos tan importantes en la vida de los negocios, la generación y la aplicación del conocimiento resulta ser un factor clave para el desempeño y la permanencia de las empresas familiares. El conocimiento que genera la investigación de la gestión de familias empresarias tiene un alto valor para la sociedad. Por su impacto económico, por la alta proporción que hay de empresas familiares y su importancia que éstas tienen en la generación del crecimiento y del empleo, y también, igualmente, este conocimiento tiene un valor desde un punto de vista social, ya que al descubrir las mejores prácticas para lograr la armonía y el bienestar de nuestras familias, se genera una dinámica social que influye en la cultura y en la formación de una sociedad con mejores valores éticos. Cabe decir en este punto que las familias empresarias exitosas, además, son un referente y un modelo a seguir en nuestra sociedad. Es por esto que en el Centro de Empresas Familiares de la UDEM estamos fomentando el impulso a la investigación y, por otra, a su aplicación, en respuesta a las necesidades específicas que presenta cada organización. El día de hoy, en particular, deseo reconocer los estudios de quienes reciben el Premio Adalberto Viesca Sada a la investigación en Empresa Familiar Latinoamericana por su excelente trabajo y los exhorto a seguir contribuyendo con su talento a generar más conocimiento en este relevante tema, porque estamos seguros que estos esfuerzos se verán recompensados al poder contar en México y el resto de Latinoamérica con más familias empresarias exitosas. Muchas gracias.
Agradecemos a Carlos García por su mensaje. El Premio UDEM Adalberto Viesca Sada reconoce estudios y trabajos que identifican estrategias y prácticas efectivas que puedan impactar positivamente el desarrollo y la permanencia de las empresas familiares latinoamericanas. Los estudios y trabajos recibidos fueron revisados y calificados en forma anónima por un grupo de académicos nacionales e internacionales de diferentes universidades, coordinados todos ellos por Salvador Guajardo, investigador del Centro de Empresas Familiares de la UDEM. y se seleccionaron los 3 trabajos que cumplieron y mejor se apegaron a los criterios de este premio. A continuación, los invitamos a ver las presentaciones de los trabajos ganadores. Cada investigación será presentada por sus autores en un tiempo de 5 minutos. El primero de ellos, Juan Manuel San Martín, de la Universidad de las Américas en Puebla, será quien nos presente el estudio titulado Composición del mecanismo de gobierno corporativo y desempeño en economías emergentes, el caso mexicano. Corre video.
Hola, muy buenas tardes a todos. El día de hoy me toca presentar el trabajo Efectos del control familiar en la creación de valor de las empresas familiares en México, que junto con el doctor Jorge Durán Encalada escribimos y enviamos para presentar a este evento que realiza anualmente la UDEM a través de su Centro de Empresas Familiares. Pues nuestro trabajo se enfoca básicamente en las empresas familiares que cotizan en la Bolsa Mexicana de Valores. Como muchos de ustedes saben, las empresas familiares representan la mayoría de las empresas en nuestro país. No solamente hablo de las micro, pequeñas y medianas empresas, sino también dentro de la propia Bolsa Mexicana de Valores, donde prácticamente el 80% de las empresas que cotizan pues son de carácter familiar. Nosotros en nuestro trabajo nos enfocamos principalmente en el efecto que puede tener la estructura de propiedad familiar y los mecanismos de gobierno sobre la creación de valor. Específicamente sobre el desempeño financiero de las propias compañías. Y para ello analizamos una serie de variables y los efectos que pueden tener. Analizamos las variables de concentración de propiedad, ya sea a través de acciones en manos de una familia o a través de la dirección general también de la empresa que se encuentre en manos de un miembro de la familia. Analizamos también mecanismos de gobierno internos y externos. Dentro de los mecanismos de gobierno interno que analizamos es básicamente el Consejo de Administración en dos partes. Por un lado, el tamaño del Consejo de Administración y por otro lado, la presencia de consejeros independientes en el propio Consejo. La idea es ver cómo funciona o de qué manera afecta el Consejo de Administración a la creación de valor de las empresas en México. Y por otro lado, nos centramos también en el tema del apalancamiento como mecanismo externo. Es decir, que haya apalancamiento por parte de las empresas familiares en México, ¿tendrá un efecto o no sobre la creación de valor de la propia compañía? En estricta teoría, el financiamiento se debería de adquirir para una serie de proyectos con valor presente neto positivo y además de esto da un segundo vistazo al funcionamiento de la compañía a través sobre todo de los propios bancos que se estarán asegurando de que el dinero que le ha sido prestado a la empresa pues se aplique de manera responsable para generar esta creación de valor. Entonces, nosotros utilizamos una serie de datos que obtuvimos de la Bolsa Mexicana de Valores. Nos centramos en un periodo que es de 11 años, 2005 a 2018, lo que nos permitió darle seguimiento a 64 empresas a lo largo del tiempo. Entonces, ¿qué fue principalmente lo que nosotros encontramos? El primer hallazgo que encontramos es que la concentración de propiedad en manos de una familia en México genera, incentiva, ayuda a la creación de valor dentro de las empresas familiares mexicanas. Por otro lado, cuando analizamos el tema de los consejos de administración, nos dimos cuenta que consejos de administración pequeños tienen un efecto positivo sobre la creación de valor o el desempeño financiero de las propias compañías. Asimismo, el que haya una presencia considerable o una presencia en términos de lo que dice el Consejo el Estatuto de Mejores Prácticas Corporativas en nuestro país, que haya un porcentaje de cuando menos el 25% de consejeros independientes dentro de los consejos de administración, también incentiva, ayuda a la creación de valor. Y por otro lado, encontramos que el tema del endeudamiento en las empresas familiares efectivamente ayuda a generar la creación de valor, siempre y cuando esté balanceado por consejeros independientes dentro del consejo. ¿Qué quiero decir? Que si a la hora de endeudar la compañía solamente tenemos a un director general que proviene de la propia familia llevando las riendas de la empresa, pues esto puede generar problemas a la toma de decisión. Lo que nosotros encontramos es que si va a haber endeudamiento dentro de las empresas, debe de ser balanceado por consejeros independientes que ayuden al miembro de la familia, que es director general, a tomar mejores decisiones dentro de la propia compañía. Es decir, encontramos elementos de sustitución y complementariedad dentro de los mecanismos de gobierno, que esa es nuestra principal aportación dentro del trabajo. Y bueno, el tema de implicaciones prácticas básicamente va al tema de sensibilizar a los dueños de las empresas familiares sobre la importancia del gobierno corporativo dentro de sus propias compañías. Entonces, por mi parte es todo. Les agradezco mucho y muy buenas tardes a todos.
Agradecemos a Juan Manuel San Martín por su presentación. El segundo de los premios UDEM Adalberto Viesca Sada 2020 es otorgado al estudio titulado La Pólvora, un caso de estudio en administración de empresas familiares, el cual será presentado por Óscar Howell Fernández, investigador independiente. Los dejo con el video.
Muy buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Óscar Howell Fernández. Soy escritor e investigador en temas de empresa familiar y miembro de empresas familiares también. Nuestro trabajo premiado es un caso de negocio de una empresa familiar en Costa Rica llamada La Pólvora. Primero que todo, quisiera expresar nuestro agradecimiento a la UDEM y al Premio Adalberto Viesca Sada por el reconocimiento. También mencionar a mis coautores, Rogelio Fernández Zagot, un abogado y asesor de empresas en Costa Rica, y el doctor Alejandro Antonio Arriaga Martínez, profesor investigador de la Universidad de Anáhuac, México. Nuestro caso sigue la historia de don Lucas Fernández y de su empresa en Costa Rica. Don Lucas Fernández fue un importante empresario y figura pública en Costa Rica en la primera mitad del siglo XX y mi bisabuelo, lo que me haría a mí parte de la cuarta generación del negocio familiar. Su empresa, La Pólvora, se dedicaba al cultivo de café, al cultivo de la caña, madera, aserraderos, y también tenía intereses en urbanización y el negocio de la cervecería en Costa Rica. El caso se trata principalmente de cómo se gestionó la sucesión en la empresa familiar, pero durante un tiempo muy largo, cerca de un siglo, y abarca 4 generaciones. Esto es lo que creemos que hace muy especial este caso. Y dentro de la sucesión se explora especialmente el tema del legado personal y empresarial del fundador de la empresa. Los hallazgos dentro de este caso, yo creo que vale la pena primero mencionar que encontramos que prolongar innecesariamente el periodo en que conviven el fundador y el sucesor en la empresa familiar es algo que no conviene. Es decir, este periodo que se llama el reino compartido puede ser muy complicado con la presencia de ambas personas. También encontramos que es muy importante dentro de una sucesión, más que todo cuando es compleja, tener en cuenta las necesidades de toda la familia involucrada. Y un poco más allá, en cuanto al legado, que no solo es económico, encontramos que es importante especialmente para las generaciones futuras. Y es algo que se debe tratar de cuidar y darle continuidad. En cuanto a cómo este trabajo puede encontrar aplicación para el empresario familiar, pensamos que uno de los aspectos que que surgen es que es necesario tener un buen gobierno corporativo, en especial para familias, como en el caso de la pólvora, que no tenían conocimiento de órganos de gobierno y de protocolos y cosas de este tipo, principalmente por el tiempo en que sucedieron las cosas. Es realmente crítico tener estos elementos para que funcionen y se dé la continuidad. Y también hemos encontrado que el caso es una aplicación muy concreta del modelo de la riqueza socioemocional en la empresa, en cómo se toman decisiones dentro de una empresa familiar. Pues nada más, agradecer otra vez a la UDEM y al Premio Adalberto Viesca Sada por el reconocimiento y muchas gracias por la asistencia. Saludos desde Madrid.
Nosotros agradecemos a Óscar Howell Fernández por su presentación. Y el tercer premio UDEM Adalberto Viesca Sada 2020 es otorgado al estudio titulado Empresas que trascienden, el caso La Huerta, el cual será presentado por Pablo Álamo del CETIS, Escuela de Graduados en Administración. Corre video.
Muy buenas, un saludo a todos los presentes, de manera especial a los colegas de la Universidad de Monterrey y en particular a la familia Adalberto Viesca Sada, a Lucía y a sus hijos Adrián, Gabriel y Alejandro. Es para mí un honor presentar este trabajo, este caso de estudio que escribí con la doctora Carmen Echeverría como profesores de CETIS Universidad en Baja California. Nos planteamos presentar a nuestros estudiantes un caso de estudio que les ayudara a entender un tema muy importante de ética empresarial. En nuestros cursos, en nuestros módulos de ética empresarial y responsabilidad social corporativa, intentamos enseñar estas temáticas con casos prácticos. Y así llegamos a La Huerta, llegamos a esta empresa 100% familiar y mexicana, que es un orgullo para todo México por sus buenas prácticas, por su reputación, por su calidad mundial, que ha sido premiada en Estados Unidos, en Canadá, en Japón, entre otros países. El tema principal de este caso es la ética, la toma de decisiones y concretamente el razonamiento ético. Nosotros queremos plantear a la comunidad académica y al mundo empresarial la importancia de tomar decisiones éticas fruto de un proceso, no de manera impulsiva o por puro instinto. Y eso es lo que intentamos enseñar a nuestros estudiantes del MBA. Y con este caso queremos ilustrar esta temática tan importante. Las aplicaciones prácticas pues son tres principalmente. La primera, educar la toma de decisiones ética. La segunda, entender las fortalezas y particularidades propias de la empresa familiar, esa relación tan particular entre la familia y la empresa y la familia, y cómo los valores de la familia tienen una importancia trascendental en las buenas prácticas corporativas. Y la tercera aplicación práctica tiene que ver con la cultura ética organizacional, cómo también la familia tiene mucho que decir y sobre todo el legado del fundador en esa cultura ética organizacional. Entre los hallazgos y conclusiones, pues hay algunas que consideramos que pueden ser muy interesantes tanto para la academia como para el mundo empresarial. El primer hallazgo, la primera conclusión es que la ética exige tener claro la noción de límite. No todo está permitido. Hay unas líneas rojas que nunca podemos traspasar, ¿no? Un segundo hallazgo tiene que ver con la importancia de la identidad y de los valores familiares y cómo estos influyen en el comportamiento ético empresarial. Influyen de tal manera, y el caso lo plantea, de que incluso el colaborador que ha tenido una falla ética está esperando ya que se le aplique la sanción correcta para respetar esa cultura y esos valores familiares. Es tal el vínculo que suele haber entre los colaboradores y una familia, y una empresa familiar y una familia empresaria, que ellos mismos quieren que haya, por así decirlo, esa lealtad, que no se en ningún momento de alguna manera se traspase, ¿verdad?, esa importancia que tiene la lealtad a la familia empresaria y a esos valores. Y luego una tercera conclusión tiene que ver con que toda empresa tiene una cultura ética que tiene que ir conociendo y desarrollando y formando en todos sus colaboradores. Esos valores familiares se convierten en cultura y esa cultura implica también un trabajo de, por así decirlo, de formación, de educación, y que esa misma educación luego revierte en el mismo comportamiento ético. Creo que todo este trabajo tiene un enorme interés para los empresarios familiares porque nos recuerda este caso de que la ética se pone a prueba cuando de alguna manera nos cuestiona, un momento particular de la empresa nos cuestiona nuestros valores, cuando queremos hacer una excepción, cuando decimos y aquí también tenemos que ser tan contundentes, tan consistentes, y en esos momentos delicados son donde se pone a prueba en lo que realmente creemos, en la necesidad de ser consistentes con nuestras decisiones. Básicamente este es nuestro trabajo, obviamente de manera muy resumida porque la huerta realmente es un ejemplo de muchísimas más cosas. Muchas gracias por esta invitación, por este reconocimiento y un saludo de nuevo a todos los presentes.
Agradecemos a Pablo Álamo por su presentación. Para realizar un estudio de investigación de este tipo se requiere de la participación entusiasta y activa de empresarios familiares que contribuyan con su punto de vista a proveer información de valor para la solución de alguna situación bajo estudio. Es por ello que a continuación tendremos el mensaje del presidente del Consejo del Centro de Empresas Familiares de la Universidad de Monterrey, Gabriel Zambrano Benítez. Doy paso a su video.
Muy buenas noches. Deseo agradecer la presencia en este evento del señor rector de la Universidad de Monterrey, Mario Páez, de los familiares de Adalberto Viesca Sada, de nuestros consejeros del Centro de Empresa Familiar y de empresarios familiares que hoy en forma remota nos acompañan. Las empresas familiares son organizaciones con rasgos muy particulares y que se constituyen a través de dos realidades distintas, la empresa y la familia. Su permanencia y sostenibilidad en el tiempo son importantes, ya que gran parte del tejido empresarial y comercial está cimentado en este tipo de empresas. De lo anterior, surge la necesidad de gestionar con éxito distintas situaciones que pueden surgir a largo de la vida de estas empresas familiares. Actualmente se está presentando por causa de la contingencia del COVID-19 el más importante reto que ha experimentado debido a la necesaria paralización que ha experimentado la economía en los diferentes países. El contexto global de incertidumbre, de cambio constante y de inseguridad es el nuevo escenario en donde están las empresas familiares. Ante este panorama, hay familias empresarias que, gracias a su resiliencia, conocida como la capacidad de enfrentar momentos de adversidad y adaptarse rápidamente a los cambios que se dan dentro de los periodos de inestabilidad, han podido sobrevivir manteniendo sus negocios y aún creando nuevas oportunidades de crecimiento. Este proceso de resiliencia está conectado con la historia familiar, los valores y la visión compartida con el objetivo de conservar el legado familiar y empresarial, lo cual permite lograr altos niveles de cohesión, flexibilidad y adaptabilidad para explorar nuevas formas de hacer negocios, de buscar nuevos mercados y de aprovechar las oportunidades que también se presentan en los periodos de crisis. En el evento del día de hoy Tendremos como expositora a una destacada investigadora internacional en donde conoceremos a través de ella cuáles son las diferentes dimensiones de la resiliencia que se presentan en las empresas familiares y cómo superan estos negocios las crisis. Finalmente, es importante en esta reunión tomemos conciencia de la relevancia que tiene el fomentar diferentes estudios de investigación aplicada que conforme la base sobre la cual los empresarios familiares podemos formar decisiones acertadas y encaminadas a lograr el negocio y la unión familiar. Muchas gracias.
Agradecemos a Gabriel Zambrano por su mensaje. Y enseguida me permito compartir con ustedes una breve semblanza de la doctora Rania Labaki. Rania es directora de Family Business Research Center en EDEC Business School en París, Francia. También es miembro del grupo de investigadores de empresas familiares en Cornell University. Ella es directora del comité académico de Family Business Network en Francia y forma parte del grupo asesor en Landsberg, Gerstig y Asociados, empresa consultora internacional en Estados Unidos. También es una conferencista que ha presentado temas de empresa familiar en más de 50 países. Ella tiene diferentes publicaciones en revistas de investigación, capítulos de libros, casos de estudio y también en medios de prensa como Le Figaro, Forbes y Financial Times. El título de la conferencia de la doctora Labaki es Las dimensiones de la resiliencia en la empresa familiar. Cualquier pregunta que tengan, por favor, anótenla en el chat y la doctora Labaki la contestará por correo electrónico. A continuación, el video de la doctora Labaki.
Hi everyone, I am delighted to share with you a presentation where I will be disclosing some of my latest research on resilience and family business and the emotional dimension underpinning them, as well as the state of the research on the topic and some practical guidelines for family businesses, which might be useful in crisis in general and in the current crisis in particular. So the title of my presentation is The Resilience Dimensions of Family Businesses. I will be splitting my presentation in three parts. First of all, setting the stage by looking at a glimpse of the facts and figures. Then I will move to the second part, which is about the process of resilience over generations and sharing, therefore, the learnings from research and practice. And last but not least, we will see together the concluding observations with the practical guidelines and some avenues for future research. So I will start now with setting the stage, a glimpse at facts and figures. The winds of change are blowing today more than ever, questioning our thoughts, questioning our plans, and questioning our, future vision of what the world should be like. In the same time, there is a growing consensus regarding unexpected global environmental challenges we are currently facing, increasing digitalization, as well as changing family structures all around the world. So these changes come into place in addition with more recent ones, which become more silent today, such as gender and racial equalities, as well as the COVID-19 crisis. At the same time, as Heraclitus has put it centuries ago, the only thing that is constant is change. So in order for us to be able to make sure that we live our lives fully and we contribute to the communities fully, we need to take into account the fact that change is part of the game. Friedman has added an interesting quote to this thought. He said that one of the most obvious facts of society is that individuals die, but institutions remain. So this questions the institutions that we know of and that have managed to survive centuries. Among them, family businesses. Family businesses are among the oldest organizations worldwide, and they are, perpetuating family values over generations, despite many crises and significant changes on different levels, financial, economic levels, political levels, and so on. So as you can see on the slides, we have different examples of century-old family businesses from different countries in different industries, from banking to jewelry, to hospitality, to distilleries, to other, industries. And all this tells us how diverse family businesses could be, in the same time, how resilient they could be. So if we ask ourselves, what do century-old family businesses have really in common? Resilience really come into place. And the COVID-19 crisis has testified about it again. The Credit Suisse Family 1000 Index actually has recently shown that there was continued outperformance of family-owned businesses as compared to non-family-owned businesses in every region and every sector. So this highlights the specific resilience that family businesses have, and leads us to consider understanding what lies, behind this resilience, how this resilience have been built over generations, and how it is impacting the survival of those businesses today. As Mena and Xavier has put it, crisis holds the potential for profound change in organizations and industries. So crisis is oftentimes, a synonym of change. What makes it different in a family business is that when crisis hits, it's not only pushing for a change in the ownership structure and the business structure, but also at the family, structure. And most importantly, it's really about crisis and changes at the intersection of those different structures. So family businesses have this family, structure which is different, and we need to keep it in mind. At the same time, over generations, century-old family businesses have managed crises of different types, not only pandemics, but also financial crisis, identity crisis, relationship crisis, ethical crisis, health crisis. These are the different types of crises that were identified in a recent research I have done, showing that, in family businesses, it can really get more complex than we would think about in a non-family business. At the same time, we need to be aware of sleeping water in the family business, because sometimes we don't have crisis signals, but in the same times, crisis is building up under the water. In a way, it's like having an iceberg and just looking at the tip of the iceberg, whereas, lots of tensions and conflicts can really hinder the family business progress and sometimes lead really to its failure. So we need to keep in mind that crisis in family business can be more complex, but at the same time, there are many dimensions of resilience that makes it more easy sometimes for family businesses to survive despite this complexity. So this leads us to the second part of the presentation about the process of resilience over generations, learning from research and practice. And what better place to start than by questioning where the business is coming from, where the business is going to be able to understand how the business is going to get there. In other words, what is important for us is to keep in mind the objective that organizations have, because the objectives will, in a way, explain why businesses behave in certain ways in crisis times and manage to overcome those crises or not. Recently, a year ago, The Economist have published an issue questioning what companies are for. And in this issue, they went back and tried to understand how the objectives of the firm have evolved over time. And this leads us to questioning, basically, what is the objective of value creation that organizations overall are setting up nowadays? For a very long time, especially in the Anglo-Saxon world, we had the objective of shareholders' value creation, which was predominant. Even Friedman, who was a Nobel Prize winner in economics, have answered, once asked about what is the social responsibility of business, the fact that it's about increasing profits for shareholders. So this shareholders' value approach was predominant for several decades, even though this approach might have been seen as detrimental to the environmental and social benefits that organizations might also pursue and contribute to. We had also the stakeholders' value approach, which is increasingly gaining interest, and it is geared towards meeting the needs of the diversity of shareholders, but also other stakeholders that the businesses have. The customers, the suppliers, the creditors, the communities, the employees, and so on and so forth. And nowadays, we are seeing increasingly purpose-driven organizations, in the capitalism arena, and gaining increasing interest. Family businesses actually are part of these purpose-led or purpose-driven organizations, and they are pursuing this stakeholders approach since centuries. They were always geared not only to create financial value, but also to create social and emotional value, as researchers have demonstrated it in the last 2 decades. In addition to that, their leadership is value-laden. It's a servant, ethical, authentic, and participative leadership in most of the cases. Of course, family businesses are not homogeneous groups, but the tendency goes this way. Research on resilience, to be able to understand how family businesses pursuing such role manage to overcome this crisis, is still nascent at this stage. So recently I have looked at the literature and also I have undergone a series of interviews with family businesses worldwide to be able to understand how they were overcoming this COVID-19 crisis. To start with, it's important also to define what we mean by resilience. So there are basically 5 major components that define resilience. Exposure to adversity, which could be crisis, and a dynamic process that is being engaged to be able to positively adapt to this adversity, which also could lead to strengthening and enhancing the resources of the existing systems. And this resilience actually is not static, it evolves, and it allows over time to incur an ongoing development and foster the ability of companies, for instance, to deal with crisis. So looking at resilience, we can look at it from multiple perspectives. It's a resilience in the organization, in the ownership level, but also the family level, and the interaction of all those different structures with, the other stakeholders, including the community. So it's about building up resilience at these, intersections. And this is important when we come, to understand the resilience in family businesses. Now, let me share with you 4 dimensions of resilience that were identified in research. The financial resilience, the social resilience, the entrepreneurial resilience, and the emotional resilience. And I'll try to deal with them by articulating them around 4 main questions that may come up in crisis. And these questions are the following: whether and how, family businesses maintain the family harmony, innovate the business model, engage in more responsible practices, sell or not sell the different family businesses that might be controlled by the family. So I'll start first by dealing with a question about maintaining the family harmony. Okay, so what does help building family harmony or maintaining family harmony, in crisis? Keeping in mind that sometimes crisis might, be linked to this family harmony without being linked to outside, pandemics or financial issues. Just as important observation that I would like you to keep in mind when I'm explaining this point is the fact that family businesses are not homogeneous and they are different. And recently, research showed that actually they are different in terms of the degree of emotional connection that the business might have with the family. So on a continuum of degrees of interaction between the family and the business, we can see that some family businesses have a more balanced interaction, which means that the emotional connection between the business and the family and the emotional flows from the business to the family are rather balanced. And on the extreme, we can find family businesses which are enmeshed, which means that there is a very high degree of emotional interaction, and everything taking place in the family is impacting to a very high degree the business, especially on the emotional level, and vice versa. And on the other extreme, we have disengaged family businesses with families completely disconnected from the businesses, and as such, emotional flows do not, go to the business and vice versa. So why it is important to keep this in mind? Because this will tell us when a crisis takes place, let's say in the business system or the family system, the impact on the overall family business system will be different depending on the degree of emotional interaction between the family and the business. Now, when a crisis, hits, the equilibrium that is existing in the family system actually is usually disrupted. In other words, family members are emotionally impacted by the different, emotional intensities taking place. Usually when a crisis hits, anxiety, strikes as well. And there is some time that the family needs to be able to adjust and eventually to recreate a new equilibrium or to go back to the initial equilibrium. That's what we call family homeostasis. So basically, the ability of families to be able to reach a family homeostasis after a crisis might be different, but in the same time, families might learn from the past, might learn from how they managed some previous emotional crisis in the future, or even from previous generations, how they, manage such crisis to be able to, bounce back and gain this family harmony again. Because crises inevitably generate emotions, and at the same time, emotions can influence crisis and make crisis sometimes even more important than initially. We have many examples about family businesses that actually were sold or simply collapsed because of crisis. We have Gucci family. The business is no longer a family business. It's no longer owned, neither managed by the Gucci family because of those family big conflicts. Steinberg, there were also rivalry among the sisters of the second generation, and the business, although very successful originally, did not last. And then we have other cases, for example, the Wall Street Journal, which was sold, given some diverging interest between family shareholders. Anheuser-Busch, also the business which was sold, and there were lots of tension among the father and the son. And then we have, other families which managed actually to overcome tensions or, crises which, were starting to affect the family harmony. Because, for instance, Hermès family was about to lose the family control of the business because of the hostile takeover by LVMH. But the family connected all together. They managed to agree on a shareholders' agreement to maintain their shares in the business. And there were some court issues, but in the end, the family maintained the control, and harmony allowed the family to stay in the business. So here are two, extreme examples of how, the ability of family to get back to this family homeostasis might allow the family harmony to continue and the family business to still be in the hands of the family or not, actually. So it's very important for the family to build this emotional resilience over time. And I have also engaged in a lot of research around emotions, some of which you can see here on the slide. And I would just like to share with you some thoughts about how, from a process perspective, it is possible to manage crisis that affects the family harmony. So basically, when there is an emotional response to any crisis, this emotional response comes often after an appraisal of the crisis, of what happened. And this is what appraisal theories tell us, basically. And it's following appraising, this crisis, the emotional response taking place, that there is an action and behavior. Sometimes, the appraisal is not accurate. Sometimes the information we have about the crisis is not accurate neither, or there are some misperceptions or even some biases that will not allow family members to make the right assessment of the situation and to have the right emotional response that will lead to, a positive behavior. For this reason, emotional regulation is key, and emotional regulation can take place by reconsidering the initial crisis, appraising it, working on the type of emotional response and the intensity of the emotion, and last but not least, taking action accordingly. And in my research, I have identified different intervention strategies that families can put in place to be able to manage crisis. First of all, families can, look into support, legal support, family business consulting support, but also sometimes psychological and family therapy support or spiritual support. So that was an interesting finding of the research. So sometimes, the reference to religious values, spiritual values can really help in navigating crisis. Sometimes also governance structures are very helpful. Peer learning and educational programs can also help the family learn how to navigate crisis. And last but not least, having key family members as chief emotional officers whom are respected by everyone in the family, and who have who are enough wise as considered by family members to help them deal with such crisis. So there is a portfolio of possibilities for families to do so. It's important to be aware of these and to be able to move accordingly. Now let's move to the second point, which leads to the entrepreneurial resilience, and it's about innovating the family business model. Of course, there are different ways of engaging entrepreneurial resilience. I wanted to focus on this question because oftentimes, families need to decide whether, to stay as they are, to still do business as, they are used to, or to make some important changes. And they're sometimes conflicted because they have the traditional, way of doing, the traditional values they don't want to question. And at the same time, there is need also to move on to deal with the changes in the environment. What is most important here is to decide where the family wants to strike. In other words, sometimes family have different businesses, so they need to decide which business they want really to focus on. And research tends to say that sustainable family business model innovation is negatively associated with a level of emotional attachment to the business. So it's important for the families to be able to assess to what extent this emotional attachment is biasing their judgment regarding the changes that need to be made to be able to engage in changes. And when we think about family business model innovation, the idea is really to think about the innovation and the different components of the family business model canvas, and to think, whether we needed to act at the proposition, at the value proposition level, at the customer's level, at the cost structure level, at the cost revenues, at the revenue structure level, partners level, or the whole process of production, for instance. So it's important to really reconsider this, because families in business are known to be entrepreneurial. You know, entrepreneurship is really in their DNA. So they really need to question their family business model, and to make sure that, you know, they keep in mind the values of the business and they do the right disruptions. And actually in the COVID-19 crisis, we have seen how family businesses really engage in different ways to deal with the crisis. They revised, for instance, their production lines to produce masks, which was the case, for example, of Michelin. They also revised the production lines to produce hydroalcoholic gels, which was the case, for example, for Sisley. Beek, for instance, has developed new pens with the intention to support hospitals. So all the other profits would go to hospitals, for example. And we saw also other alcoholic beverage companies which decided to produce hydroalcoholic gels, given the know-how that they have, and they put it at the service of the communities. And even we can move even further by seeing that those businesses have also engaged in significant changes in their business model to deal with the crisis. Now let's move to the third point about social resilience, and the idea that family businesses tend to engage more in responsible business practices. And here what I would like to highlight is the fact that family businesses in the current crisis are really showing a lot of support for the communities around them. And also they're showing a lot of support for their employees. So their employees appear to be the number one priority, securing jobs, for instance, and securing also the safety, ensuring the safety of the employees are really an important part of the game. And recent research also have showed, for instance, that multi-generational loyalties take place in family businesses and really help those businesses overcome crisis. In other words, as you can see here on the slide, it's based on research that have done on a multi-century old family businesses, Banco Tanguy. And this bank basically has built circles of loyalties with their partners, of course, with the family members, with the clients, and with other allies over generations. And those loyalties were mutual. And sometimes clients are clients of the bank over generations. So this means also that when family businesses have difficulties, they can count on the support of those different partners and how those different stakeholders, because they were there also when those stakeholders needed support. So this also provides a very interesting social resilience characteristics, because this allows us to understand how family businesses might be stronger in facing adversities. So just keeping this in mind. And last but not least, we have the financial resilience aspect, and the idea that some family businesses might consider perhaps selling one of their businesses, or maybe the whole business entities that they control. And this entails interesting emotional components also to be taken into account, because again here the decision to divest depends on the level of regret that family members might feel during the process or even after the process. And it is not unlikely to see some families buying back their business after sale, which was the case, for example, of Champagne Tétanger in France, because of the strong emotional attachment that family members might have to the business. So it is very important, during crisis to weigh the level of emotional attachment and other emotional dimension in that decisions, but also to be aware that family businesses are more resilient financially because they have a very specific structure of preferences in terms of financing. They tend to rely on self-financing first, followed by financing from banks, and then financing from in the financial markets, basically. So when a crisis hits, usually those businesses have a cushion of liquidities, so they can, they can survive for a certain time without having to look for loans or to sell assets to be able to do so. They also have privileged relationships with banks, as I mentioned previously, with the circles of loyalties. And as such, banks usually trust them, have followed them over generations. So it is more easy for those family businesses to access financing if needed. In addition to that, usually shareholders are also ready to put the to make extra effort and support financially those businesses. And that was the case of Simone Perel, a French family business that I interviewed during my study. And last, what I wanted also to highlight is the fact that those businesses also distribute usually, generally, low levels of dividends. And sometimes they're also willing to sacrifice dividends for the business growth and survival. And that was the case of Solvay, a family business based in Belgium, where the shareholders agreed not to get all the dividends that were planned initially. And even though the business was going through difficulties, they decided to create a fund to be able also to support employees and their families during this crisis. So all this, shows us that resilience in family businesses is multidimensional. It's both emotional, social, it's financial, and it's entrepreneurial. And all these makes family businesses having the right building blocks to survive crisis and over generations. And last but not least, those families also tend to learn from the past and to build on these learnings to teach the next generation how to overcome crisis. So there is, histories of resilience which proved to be helpful, and the storytelling, have never been so important the current pandemic either. So, just keep in mind that it's important for family businesses to be aware of the forces they have and to leverage those forces for the current pandemic and for, future pandemics. Now, to be able to wrap it up, just keep in mind that the crisis brings a number of questions around family harmony, around the business model, and around responsible practices, and also around, the financial management of the business. And it's important to keep in mind that not all businesses are alike. The emotional archetypes of the family business differ. So, but family businesses are not static neither. So they can always tend to work on their weaknesses and improve, those weaknesses to be able to tend for the balanced emotional archetype style. And this will help the family to increase the cohesion and adaptability of the members, to improve the emotional attachment in a way that they are able to innovate the business model by sticking to the family values. And also keep in mind that they can also benefit from the circle of invisible loyalties that they have and the multi-generational loyalties to be able to provide mutual support. And last but not least, to also build on their strength in terms of financials to be able to survive the crisis and make the right decision if needed about the sale of the business or some business entities. So I am going also to post just some references that you can read and where you can go, further, and the understanding of all these family business issues. So thank you for for your attention, and have a nice end of the event. Thank you.
Le agradecemos mucho a la doctora Rania Labaki por esta conferencia. Y es así como concluimos la ceremonia de la 12ª entrega del Premio UDEM Adalberto Viesca Sada a la investigación en Empresa Familiar Latinoamericana. Agradecemos a todos ustedes su invaluable presencia que le ha dado brillo a este memorable evento. Que todos tengan muy buenas noches. Gracias.